At the New Year's Eve party, I returned to my parents' house without being invited, only to have my older sister glance at me, sneer, and tell me not to touch the food because losers don't get a share. My name is Briar, a 27-year-old digital forensics specialist from Detroit, and I spent the last few years quietly fixing the broken lives of people who would never understand the complexity of my work or the weight of my bank account. I didn't cry or make a scene when she insulted me in front of her wealthy guests, choosing instead to silently walk out into the freezing Michigan night while the scent of expensive lobster lingered in the air. 3 hours later, a notification flashed on my phone showing that the entire $2,800 catering bill had been charged to my primary credit card. It was in that moment that I realized my kindness had been mistaken for weakness, so I decided to do something they could never expect and watch their perfect holiday celebration crumble into absolute chaos. Before we dive into the details of how I dismantled their world, I would love to know what time it is and which city you are watching from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell to support my journey, as your engagement helps me share these raw experiences with more people around the globe. Drop a comment below with your location, then grab a drink and settle in, because this family drama is about to get incredibly intense. Growing up in the industrial shadows of Detroit meant learning early on that some people are born to be the stars of the show, while others are simply expected to provide the electricity that keeps the spotlights burning. For as long as I can remember, my sister Teagan was the golden child of the family, whose every whim was treated as a divine command by our parents. Mom and Dad spent decades pouring their limited resources into her dream of becoming a high-end event planner, believing her charisma would eventually lift the entire family out of our modest middle-class existence. While they were busy financing her expensive wardrobe and social outings, I was the invisible daughter who stayed in the basement, teaching myself how to recover encrypted files and navigate the dark corners of the internet. They saw my interest in computers as a strange, unmarketable hobby, and often reminded me that I lacked the social grace that made Teagan so special in their eyes. Even after I moved out and started my own digital forensics firm, the dynamic never shifted, because I didn't feel the need to broadcast my success or drive a flashy car just to prove a point. My parents grew comfortable with the idea that I was just a low-level technician, making enough to get by. Yet they never questioned why their utility bills were always paid on time, or why the property taxes on their house mysteriously disappeared every quarter. I had set up automatic payments for almost everything in their lives years ago, using a separate business account that they never saw, simply because I wanted them to be safe. They accepted these miracles with a casual shrug, assuming that some government program or forgotten insurance policy was covering the costs, while they focused all their energy on praising Teagan's latest social achievement. My sister had a way of making her life seem like a non-stop parade of luxury, constantly posting photos from expensive restaurants and elite galas that she attended as a guest, but described as if she had hosted them herself. She looked down on my calloused hands and the simple jeans I wore to our rare family dinners, often making snide remarks about how I should try to find a real career that didn't involve staring at glowing screens all night. Mom would always nod in agreement, telling me that it was a shame I couldn't be more like my sister, who was finally dating a man named Sterling, who supposedly came from a powerful investment family in Chicago. Sterling was exactly the kind of man my parents adored, loud, arrogant, and constantly talking about million-dollar mergers while wearing suits that probably cost more than their entire living room furniture. I remember one specific evening when Dad sat me down and explained that since I didn't have any real responsibilities or a high-maintenance lifestyle, I should be more generous with the little money I had to help Teagan build her brand. It didn't matter that I was working 80 hours a week for international law firms to secure the digital evidence they needed for multi-million-dollar lawsuits, because in this house, I was just the utility player. They never asked how I was doing, or if I needed anything, only calling when a computer glitched, or when a bill arrived that they couldn't explain, and I always handled it without a word. I truly believed that if I kept the machinery of their lives running smoothly, they might one day look at me with the same pride they reserved for Teagan's empty promises. But as the years passed, the requests for help turned into silent expectations, and the gratitude I hoped for was replaced by a growing sense of entitlement that poisoned every interaction we had. I watched Teagan and Sterling flaunt their fake success, while I sat in the corner of family gatherings, a silent benefactor who was treated like an uninvited guest at her own table. The financial burden I carried was heavy, yet it paled in comparison to the emotional weight of knowing that my parents only valued me for the problems I could solve behind the scenes. They had no idea that my firm was one of the most respected in the Midwest, or that I was the one keeping them from falling into the debt that Teagan's lifestyle was constantly generating. Every time I thought about stopping the payments, I would see Mom's tired face and convince myself that family was worth the sacrifice, no matter how much it hurt to be ignored. I was the silent guardian of their comfort, a role I had accepted, until the day it became clear that they didn't just ignore me, they actively resented my presence in their fabricated world. The realization that I was paying for my own exclusion was a slow, painful burn that I tried to ignore for the sake of peace. But the heat was becoming unbearable. I continued to fund their lives, watching from the sidelines as they built a reality that had no room for the very person making it possible. It was a dangerous game of deception, where the only person being lied to was me, believing that my loyalty would eventually be repaid with a shred of genuine affection. I was the fool who thought love could be earned through service, failing to see that some people will happily take everything you have while telling you that you're not even worth a seat at the table. This toxic cycle had become the foundation of our family, a structure that was destined to collapse the moment the silent foundation decided it had finally carried enough weight for people who didn't care if it cracked. 6 years before the disastrous New Year's Eve party that changed everything, I was a desperate young woman working out of a cramped, windowless office in a crumbling industrial park on the edge of Detroit. While Teagan was spending her weekends at prestigious networking events and demanding that Mom and Dad pay for her luxury apartment downtown, I was surviving on coffee and protein bars while learning the intricacies of data recovery. I didn't have a safety net or a trust fund, so I spent my nights sleeping on a secondhand sofa in the back of my office, surrounded by the hum of servers and the smell of ozone from overheating hardware. My parents never visited me during those early years because the neighborhood was too gritty for their tastes, and they were far too busy attending Teagan's frequent launch parties for businesses that would invariably fail within 6 months. I remember calling Dad once to tell him I had landed my first big contract with a local shipping company, only for him to interrupt me to ask if I could spare $200 for Teagan's new headshots. He didn't even ask what the contract was about, or if I was finally making enough to eat properly, proving that my achievements were only relevant if they could be liquidated into her social currency. Despite the lack of support, my reputation in the digital forensics world began to grow rapidly because I had a talent for finding the things that people went to great lengths to hide. I wasn't just fixing computers. I was unearthing hidden bank accounts, tracing offshore transactions, and recovering deleted evidence that broke open massive corporate fraud cases. By the time I was 25, I had moved out of that industrial park and into a renovated loft that served as both my home and a high-security lab, though I never told my family the true scale of my success. I intentionally kept my appearances modest when I visited them, wearing my old work boots and driving an unremarkable SUV, because I knew that showing wealth would only invite more aggressive demands for money. They saw my tired eyes and assumed I was struggling in a dead-end job, a narrative that suited Teagan perfectly, as it allowed her to remain the undisputed star of the family. She would often patronize me during holidays, giving me career advice about how I should try to work for a big corporation so I could at least have some stability instead of playing around with broken hard drives. I would just nod and listen to her talk about her dream of organizing the most exclusive parties in Michigan, knowing that I was the one secretly paying her overdue credit card bills every month. Mom and Dad lived in a state of blissful ignorance, convinced that Teagan's occasional consulting fees were what kept the family afloat, even though those fees were just money I had funneled through her accounts to protect her dignity. I had become an expert at managing their lives from a distance, using my skills to ensure they never felt the sting of a late fee or the threat of a utility shutoff. This secret life of mine required a level of emotional detachment that was difficult to maintain, especially when I had to listen to Sterling brag about his imaginary investments during dinner. Sterling had entered the picture about 2 years into my business success, and from the moment I met him, my professional instincts screamed that something was wrong with his story. He talked about high-frequency trading and private equity with the vague confidence of a con artist. Yet my parents were so desperate for a connection to real wealth that they believed every word he said. I once ran a cursory background check on him out of curiosity and found a trail of failed LLCs and small claims court judgments that suggested he was just as broke as Teagan was. However, I kept the information to myself, fearing that exposing him would only make me the villain in their eyes for trying to ruin Teagan's chance at a perfect life. I watched as Sterling manipulated my parents' hope, promising them that once his big deal closed, he would buy them a villa in Florida and take care of them forever. It was a beautiful lie that they clung to, using it as a reason to treat me even more like a second-class citizen who was just taking up space in their glorious future. My work in the lab became my sanctuary, a place where logic and evidence mattered more than the shallow perceptions of a family that refused to see the real me. I spent thousands of hours analyzing digital footprints for high-stakes clients, earning a fee that would have made Dad's head spin, all while maintaining the facade of a struggling technician. There were nights when I wanted to scream the truth to show them my bank statements and the prestigious awards hanging on my office wall, but the fear of being used even more kept me silent. I realized that if they knew I was wealthy, they wouldn't love me more. They would simply find more expensive ways to drain me until I was as empty as they were. This professional success gave me a sense of security that no one in my family could ever take away, a secret power that I carried with me every time I walked into their house. I was the one who could see through the encryption, the one who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, and yet I chose to play the role of the quiet, dependable daughter. I didn't realize back then that my silence was actually enabling their delusion, building a fragile house of cards that was destined to be blown down by the very wind I was trying to block. I continued to work in the shadows, perfecting my craft and building my empire while my family remained trapped in a cycle of vanity and false promises. They looked at me and saw a failure, never realizing that the woman they were dismissing was the only person keeping their world from spinning out of control. It was a lonely existence, but it was mine, and I took pride in the fact that I had built it without a single handheld or a word of encouragement from the people who were supposed to love me most. 2 weeks before the New Year's Eve party that would finally break my patience, Mom called me on a Tuesday morning with a voice that was uncharacteristically sweet and trembling with forced excitement. She told me that Teagan was planning a spectacular event to celebrate Sterling's newest business venture, and that it was going to be the turning point for their entire future together. According to Mom, this party wasn't just a social gathering. It was a high-stakes networking event where Sterling would finally sign the papers for a massive investment that would change our family's destiny forever. However, there was a small problem with the logistics. because the high-end catering company they wanted to use required a verified credit line with a high limit to secure the date and the premium menu. Mom explained that since Teagan was in the middle of restructuring her business accounts, she didn't have a card that met the specific requirements for such a large short-term hold. She asked if I could do a small favor by adding Teagan as an authorized user on one of my business cards just for a few days, to provide the necessary financial backing for the deposit. I hesitated, my internal alarms blaring, but Mom began to cry, saying that this was Teagan's only chance to prove herself to Sterling's wealthy associates, and that she didn't want to see her daughter's dreams crushed over a technicality. She promised that no charges would actually be made to the card, and that Sterling would be paying for the entire event with his own funds once the investment went through on the first of the year. I felt that familiar old guilt gnawing at my stomach, that desperate need to be the good daughter who saved the day when everyone else was in over their heads. I ultimately agreed, but only after making Mom promise that the card information would only be used for the verification process and nothing else. I logged into my banking portal and added Teagan to my primary business account, a card with a $50,000 limit that I used for server upgrades and high-end forensic equipment. I figured that since I had already been paying their bills for years, this was just one more silent act of support that would hopefully buy me some peace during the holiday season. A few days later, Teagan sent me a short cold text message asking for the CVV code and the expiration date, claiming the caterer needed them to finalize the temporary hold on the account. I sent the information expecting a thank you that never came and tried to focus on my own work as the end-of-year deadlines began to pile up in my lab. During this time, I didn't hear a single word about an invitation to the party, and when I checked Mom's social media, I saw her posting countdowns to the event of the century at their house in Detroit. She talked about the exclusive guest list and the professional chefs they had hired, making it sound like a royal gala that only the most elite members of society were worthy of attending. Not once did she mention my name in the comments or tag me in the photos of the preparations, even though I was the one whose credit score was making the whole thing possible. I started to feel a cold, sharp bitterness rising in my chest as I realized I was being used as a financial ghost, an invisible bank that existed only to fund their delusions while being denied entry to the reality they were creating. My friend and colleague Forrest noticed my distraction in the lab and asked why I was constantly checking my banking app, instead of focusing on the data recovery project we were finishing. I explained the situation to him, and he looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration, telling me that I was being a doormat for people who wouldn't even offer me a glass of water if I were on fire. Forrest had been with me since the early days and knew exactly how much I had sacrificed for my family, and he constantly reminded me that loyalty without respect is just a form of self-sabotage. I tried to defend them, making excuses about the stress of the holidays and Teagan's desperate need to impress Sterling, but even as the words left my mouth, they sounded hollow and pathetic. As the days ticked down to New Year's Eve, the silence from my family became deafening, and I realized with a painful clarity that they had absolutely no intention of inviting me to the party. They wanted my money, they wanted my credit limit, and they wanted the security I provided, but they didn't want the tech girl with the grease under her fingernails ruining their sophisticated aesthetic. I spent the 29th of December alone in my office watching the snow fall over the Detroit skyline and realizing that I was done being the silent foundation for their house of lies. I had spent 6 years trying to buy their love, and all I had managed to do was subsidize my own humiliation at the hands of a sister who hated me and parents who were blinded by her fake glitter. Despite the hurt, I decided I would show up at the party anyway, not to cause a scene, but to see for myself exactly what my $50,000 credit line was buying for them. I wanted to look Mom and Dad in the eye while they stood in a house I was keeping for them, eating food I was potentially paying for, and see if they felt even a flicker of shame. I didn't realize then that the evening would go far beyond simple shame and into a level of betrayal that would finally give me the strength to burn the bridges I had spent a lifetime building. I dressed in my best clothes, which were still modest compared to Teagan's flashy style, and prepared myself for the cold reception I knew was waiting for me. I was walking into a trap they had set with my own resources, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them win the game they thought I didn't know how to play. The night of the party was a brutal display of everything I had grown to despise about my family's obsession with appearances over substance. I arrived at my parents' house just as the clock struck 8, the street lined with luxury vehicles that looked entirely out of place in our aging Detroit neighborhood. The air outside was biting, but the heat radiating from the house was stifling, filled with the loud, performative laughter of people who were trying very hard to convince each other of their importance. I walked through the front door without knocking, and the first thing I saw was a team of professional servers in white jackets, carrying silver platters of hors d'oeuvres that I knew cost more per plate than my parents' weekly grocery budget. Teagan was standing in the center of the living room wearing a sequined dress that caught every light, holding a glass of champagne and holding court like a queen among her subjects. When her eyes landed on me, the smile didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disgust that made the guests around her turn to see what had caused the disruption. She didn't greet me or offer a coat check. She simply walked over her heels, clicking like a metronome of impending conflict, and leaned in close enough for me to smell the expensive perfume I had likely paid for. "What are you doing here, Briar? This is a private event for people who actually have something to contribute to the future of this city." She hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the ambient music. I looked past her to see Mom and Dad sitting on the sofa with Sterling, who was wearing a velvet blazer and looking like he had just stepped out of a bad luxury magazine. Mom looked me up and down, her expression a mix of embarrassment and annoyance, as if my presence was a stain on the perfect image she had helped Teagan curate for the night. Sterling chuckled, a sound that was both condescending and triumphant, and said something about how the IT department had arrived just in time to fix the Wi-Fi. The guests around them laughed, a polite but cruel sound that echoed in the high ceilings of the house I was secretly paying to keep heated and lit. I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs, and told Teagan that I had as much right to be there as anyone else, considering I was her sister, and it was our parents' home. That's when she delivered the line that finally shattered the last remaining pieces of my loyalty. "Don't touch the food, Briar. Losers don't get a share of a victory they didn't help build, and, quite frankly, you weren't even counted in the guest list for a reason." She turned her back on me before I could respond, resuming her conversation with a group of people I didn't recognize, leaving me standing alone in the entryway like a ghost at a feast. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that Mom and Dad weren't going to say a word in my defense. They just looked away, focusing on Sterling's animated stories about his fictional business empire. I didn't cry, and I didn't scream, though the pressure in my chest was so intense I thought I might actually stop breathing right there in the hallway. I turned around and walked back out into the freezing night, the door clicking shut behind me, with a finality that felt like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. I sat in my SUV for a long time, the engine idling, watching the silhouettes of the partygoers through the frosted windows of the house I had protected for 6 years. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a routine notification from my banking app that usually signaled a small subscription fee or a gas station purchase. I picked it up, expecting nothing, only to see a transaction alert that made the blood drain from my face so quickly I felt lightheaded. $2,800 charged by Elite Michigan Catering, processed through the authorized user card I had given to Teagan. They hadn't just used the card for verification. They had charged the entire cost of the party to my account the moment the event started, knowing I wouldn't see it until it was too late. Sterling hadn't paid for a single thing, and Teagan had lied to Mom's face while using my hard-earned money to buy the very food she had just told me I wasn't worthy of touching. The sheer naked greed of it was staggering, a level of betrayal so profound that it transcended hurt and turned into a cold, diamond-hard clarity. They were standing in there right now, celebrating their success on my dime, laughing at my expense, while I sat in the cold like a discarded tool they no longer had a use for. I realized that my family didn't see me as a person at all. I was a resource to be mined, a safety net to be jumped on, and a fool to be mocked for her own generosity. The $800 was just the tip of the iceberg, the final insult in a long history of financial and emotional theft that had finally reached its breaking GM. For years, I had been the one making sure they didn't fall, and in return, they had decided to push me off the cliff just because they liked the view from the top. I looked at the house one last time, the warm yellow light spilling out onto the snow, and I felt something inside me snap, not with a bang but with a quiet, icy click of a lock falling into place. They thought they had won, that they had successfully milked the cow one last time before discarding her, but they had forgotten one very important detail about who I was. I wasn't just a girl with a credit card. I was a digital forensics expert who controlled every single electronic artery that kept their comfortable lives flowing. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, then I would show them exactly what happens when the stranger who has been paying your bills suddenly disappears into the night. I put the car in gear and drove away from the neighborhood, my mind already racing through the protocols I would need to execute to take back everything they had stolen from me. The new year was coming in less than 4 hours, and I was going to make sure that for my family, it started with the kind of absolute darkness they had earned through their own arrogance and cruelty. 15 minutes after I drove away from the house, I pulled into the empty parking lot of a closed coffee shop, the blue light of my laptop screen reflecting in the windshield as I began the process of systematic reclamation. My hands were steady, guided by the cold professional detachment I used when I was dismantling a hacker's network or tracking a corporate spy through a labyrinth of encrypted servers. I didn't start with the $800 charge. I knew that was already in the system, and my first move was to open my banking app and flag that specific transaction as an unauthorized fraudulent charge. I provided the evidence that the card was only meant for verification and that the user had exceeded her stated authority, ensuring that the bank would initiate an immediate clawback of the funds from the catering company. But that was only the beginning of the digital blackout I was preparing to unleash on the Harrison family as the clock ticked toward midnight. I accessed the master account for our family's utility portal, a system I had managed for years because Mom and Dad couldn't remember their passwords if their lives depended on it. With a few precise clicks, I removed my primary business account as the recurring payment method for their electricity, gas, water, and high-speed internet. I didn't just stop future payments. I went into the auto-pay settings for their homeowners insurance and the premium health insurance policy I had been subsidizing for Dad's heart condition. I watched the confirmation boxes pop up on the screen, one after another, each one a silent cord being severed from the life support system they didn't even know they were hooked up to. Next, I targeted Teagan's digital life, accessing the shared family cellular plan where I was the primary account holder and the person who paid the $1,000 monthly bill for everyone's unlimited everything. I didn't just suspend her line. I reported her high-end smartphone as stolen, which would blacklist the device's IMEI number across every major carrier in the United States, rendering her $200 phone a useless brick. I then moved to the streaming services, the cloud storage accounts, and the premium memberships that Mom and Teagan used daily, changing every password and removing my payment information from each one. I felt no guilt, only a sense of profound justice, as I reclaimed the thousands of dollars each month that had been used to fuel their vanity and their comfort, while they spat on my name. I opened a secure messaging app and sent a single file to Forrest, who I knew would be awake and monitoring the server logs back at the lab. "It's done," I wrote, followed by a list of instructions to lock down my personal and business credit files so that no one, not even Mom, could ever use my identity to open another account. Forrest responded almost instantly with a digital thumbs up, knowing that this was the moment I finally chose myself over the people who had spent a lifetime using me as a stepping stone. I also took the time to revoke the authorized user status for Teagan on all my accounts, ensuring that any other hidden charges she had planned for the night would be declined instantly at the point of sale. I knew that Sterling was probably counting on my credit to cover the hotel suite he had likely booked for after the party, or the expensive champagne he was undoubtedly planning to order at a club later. By the time I was finished, the digital infrastructure of the Harrison family had been gutted, leaving only the empty shells of their expectations and the looming reality of bills they could never hope to pay. I sat back in my seat, the hum of the car's heater, the only sound in the quiet Detroit night, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had been carrying since I was a teenager. I wasn't just stopping the money. I was stopping the lie that I was responsible for their happiness and their survival at the cost of my own dignity. They had called me a loser, a failure who wasn't worth a plate of food, and now they were about to find out exactly how much a loser was worth in the modern world. Every light in their house, every drop of water in their taps, and every bar of signal on their phones was a gift from me that they had treated as a birthright. Without me, they were just people living beyond their means in a house they couldn't afford, protected by insurance they didn't pay for and pretending to be something they were not. I checked my watch and saw that it was 11:30, just 30 minutes before the new year began, and I knew that the catering company would soon be trying to finalize the payment for the night's services. When that $2,800 transaction hit the fraud block I had just installed, the manager of the catering team would be walking into that living room to demand a different form of payment from my sister. I could almost see the look on Teagan's face when her gold card was declined in front of Sterling, and all their high society guests, the mask of success slipping to reveal the desperation underneath. I didn't stay to watch the chaos, choosing instead to drive toward my own quiet loft, where I would ring in the new year with a glass of water and the knowledge that I was finally free. I had spent my life fixing things for people who broke them on purpose, but tonight, I was the one who was letting the system crash so that I could finally rebuild something for myself. The silence in my car was beautiful, a stark contrast to the performative noise of the party I had just left, and for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't worried about anyone else's bank balance. I was Briar, the digital forensics expert, the girl who could find anything, and I had finally found the one thing I had been missing all along: my own self-worth. As the first fireworks began to pop in the distance over the Detroit River, I whispered a Happy New Year to myself, knowing that for the Harrisons, the celebration was about to turn into a nightmare they could never wake up from. Morning on the 1st of January in Detroit is usually a quiet, frozen affair, but for the Harrison family, it was the start of a catastrophic chain reaction that would dismantle their carefully constructed lies within hours. I woke up at 10 in my loft, the sunlight reflecting off the industrial windows, and checked my phone to find over 40 missed calls and a deluge of frantic, increasingly aggressive text messages from Mom and Teagan. The first few messages from Teagan were filled with confusion, asking why her card had been glitched at the party and demanding that I call the bank to fix the embarrassing mistake immediately. By 2 in the morning, the tone had shifted to pure rage, with her accusing me of intentionally sabotaging her most important night and threatening to have Dad disown me for the shame I had brought upon them. Apparently, when the $2,800 charge was flagged as fraud, the catering manager hadn't been discreet. He had interrupted the toasts to demand a new card, and when Teagan's other 2 cards were also declined, the situation had escalated in front of everyone. Sterling, the supposed investment genius, had suddenly found himself unable to access his offshore accounts due to the holiday, leaving Mom and Dad to scramble for cash that they simply didn't have. The guests had watched in stunned silence as the event of the century dissolved into a squabble over a bill, with the catering staff eventually packing up the remaining food and leaving the house in a state of mid-party abandonment. But the humiliation at the party was just the beginning, as the consequences of my digital blackout began to hit them with the force of a sledgehammer as the day progressed. By noon, the high-speed internet and cable package at the house were shut off, followed closely by a notification on Dad's phone that his premium insurance policy had lapsed due to non-payment. Mom sent a frantic text saying that they couldn't even log into their Amazon accounts or their Netflix, and that Teagan's phone was showing a no service message that no amount of restarting could fix. They were trapped in a technological stone age, unable to communicate with the outside world or access the entertainment they used to drown out the reality of their empty lives. The most satisfying part of the fallout, however, came from a source I hadn't even directly targeted: Sterling's sudden and total disappearance from Teagan's life. Without the veneer of wealth that my credit card had provided, Sterling saw the Harrisons for exactly what they were: a family of pretenders who were just as broke and desperate as he was. He had slipped out of the house during the catering dispute and hadn't answered a single one of Teagan's messages since effectively ending their power couple status before the first day of the year was even over. Forrest called me later that afternoon laughing as he told me that he had tracked some of the fallout through public records and social media whispers in the Detroit event planning circles. Teagan's reputation as a high-end planner was effectively dead on arrival, as news of the declined cards and the unpaid catering bill had spread through the tight-knit community like wildfire. No one wanted to work with a planner who couldn't even pay for her own engagement party, and her wealthy associates were already distancing themselves from the social embarrassment she had become. My parents were in a state of total panic, realizing for the first time in 6 years just how much of their daily existence was dependent on the daughter they had treated as a failure. They tried to drive to my loft, but I had already instructed the building's security to deny them entry, and I had blocked their numbers on my personal phone to ensure my peace wasn't disturbed. I received a formal email from a collections agency representing the catering company, and I simply forwarded them the documentation, proving that Teagan had exceeded her authorization, leaving the debt squarely on her shoulders. Without my co-signing or my automatic payments, the house in Detroit, the one they had lived in for 30 years, was suddenly a massive financial liability that they had no way of maintaining. The homeowner's insurance lapse was a major violation of their mortgage terms, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the bank started asking very difficult questions about their financial stability. I sat on my balcony watching the cold wind whip through the city and felt a profound sense of relief that the charade was finally over. I had spent so long being the secret engine that kept them running, but now that I had stopped, I could see that there was nothing left of the family I thought I was protecting. They didn't want Briar, they wanted the user who paid the bills, and without that, I was nothing more than a stranger to them. The hauteur of their arrogance was a cold, hard reality that no amount of sequined dresses or velvet blazers could hide anymore. Teagan was now facing potential legal action for credit card fraud. Mom and Dad were looking at a mountain of debt they couldn't comprehend, and the golden future they had imagined had turned to lead. I realized that by cutting them off, I hadn't just punished them. I had finally given them the one thing they had been avoiding for years: the truth about their own lives. They would have to learn how to survive on their own, to pay their own bills, and to find a way to exist without the daughter they had spent a lifetime devaluing. It was a brutal lesson, but it was one they had earned through every sneer, every insult, and every cent they had stolen from my silence. I was no longer the girl who fixed things. I was the woman who had finally learned that some things are better left broken, so that something real can finally grow in their place. As the sun set on the first day of my new life, I deleted the last of the frantic voicemails without listening to them, the silence in my home finally matching the peace in my heart. 1 year has passed since that freezing Detroit night when I chose to let my family's world collapse, and I can say with absolute certainty that it was the most liberating decision of my entire life. I moved my forensics firm to a larger office in a different part of the city, one with more sunlight, and a team of 5 brilliant engineers who actually respect the work we do every day. I stopped checking the Harrison family's social media months ago, but the occasional update still reaches me through the small-town gossip of old neighbors and professional acquaintances. Teagan's dream of being an elite event planner ended that night, and she is now working as a junior clerk for a retail chain, a job that requires her to wear a polyester uniform and actually show up on time for a modest hourly wage. She had to move back into my parents' house, which is no longer the pristine Thuok-Gia-style home it used to be, as they struggle to keep up with basic maintenance without my hidden subsidies. Mom and Dad had to sell their second car and cut back on every luxury they once took for granted, finally experiencing the gritty reality of Detroit that they had mocked me for living in for so many years. Sterling, as I suspected, was eventually arrested in another state for a series of investment scams, proving that the man they had prized over me was nothing more than a common predator looking for an easy mark. My parents have tried to reach out a few times through various letters sent to my office, mostly filled with excuses and pleas for one last loan to help them get through a difficult month. I haven't responded to a single one, not out of malice, but because I finally understand that any money I give them is just another brick in the wall of their entitlement. Our relationship is permanently severed, a bridge that I burned to keep myself warm, and I feel no regret for the fire that consumed the lies they had fed me since I was a child. I spent my New Year's Eve this year on a quiet beach in Mexico, listening to the waves instead of the performative laughter of people who didn't love me. I realized that for 27 years I had been trying to fill a hole in my heart with bank transfers and silent sacrifices, never understanding that you can't buy a place at a table where you were never truly welcome. The freedom I feel now is worth more than every dollar I ever sent them, and the peace of mind I have cultivated is a wealth that no catering bill could ever deplete. I am no longer the invisible daughter or the tech girl who exists only to solve problems. I am a successful woman who knows exactly who she is and what she is worth. Looking back, I see that the $800 they tried to steal from me was actually the best investment I ever made, as it was the price of admission to my own life. It gave me the evidence I needed to stop doubting my own instincts and to finally see my family for the toxic environment they had created. I learned that being family doesn't give someone a license to steal your dignity, and that blood isn't a valid excuse for emotional and financial abuse. My life is now filled with people who value my skills, my time, and my character, rather than the limit on my credit cards or the problems I can fix with a laptop. I have built a new family from friends and colleagues like forest people who stand by me because of who I am, not because of what I can do for their social standing. To everyone listening to my story, I hope you understand that your value is not defined by how much you can endure for people who refuse to see your worth. If you are currently the person holding everything together for a family that treats you like an uninvited guest, I want you to know that you have the power to walk away and let the system crash. You are not a loser for demanding respect, and you are not a failure for setting boundaries that protect your soul and your hard-earned future. The strongest thing you can do is sometimes the quietest thing, simply stopping the support for people who use your kindness as a weapon against you. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for being part of this journey with me as I navigate the complexities of life and self-respect. If you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or if you have faced similar injustices, I would truly appreciate it if you could share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories and your support mean the world to me, and they remind us all that we are not alone in our struggles for dignity and truth. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, as it helps me continue to share these raw and honest experiences with our growing community. I am so grateful for each and every one of you who stayed until the very end to hear how I finally found my voice in the silence. May your new beginnings be filled with the respect you deserve and the courage to walk away from anything that no longer serves your growth. Happy New Year to all of you, and may you always find the strength to be the hero of your own